Okay, today we're going to talk about business continuity. Our objectives for this chapter are to describe the different types of wireless network attacks. We're going to list the vulnerabilities in IEE 802.11 security, and we're going to look at the different solutions for securing a wireless network. Business continuity is an organization's ability to maintain operations after a disruptive event. When we're looking at our business continuity, it's how can we get our business, keep it running if something bad happens. So business continuity preparedness, this is going to involve making sure that we have business continuity planning, a business impact analysis, and disaster recovery planning. The BCP is the process of identifying exposure to threats, creating preventative and recovery procedures, and then we also need to test them to determine if they are sufficient. Do they work? And this will consist of three essential elements. Okay, we have our business recovery planning, crisis management and communications, and disaster recovery. Our business impact analysis, this is going to identify the business functions and qualities that quantifies the impact of a loss of these functions that may have on a business operations. So this may be things such as our tangible assets, the impact upon our property, monetary funding, how is this going to impact our finance, our safety, our reputation, and even the life, the well-being of our employees and ourselves. This will also help us determine what our mission essential functions are. So that's the activities that serve as the core purpose for our enterprise, for our organization. They can also help in identifying of critical system functions. So these are the mission essential functions. Business impact analysis. We can also use this to identify a single point of failure. Can we talk about a single point of failure? That's the component or entity in a system which will disable the entire system. So if that goes down, the entire system goes down. So when we minimize these single failure points, this is going to result in us having high availability for our business. We can also use this to contain a privacy impact assessment to identify and mitigate privacy risk. And we want to set a privacy threshold assessment as well. That allows us to determine if the system contains any personally identifiable information. Disaster recovery plan, this is a plan that we're designing to focus on protecting and restoring information technology functions. It is a written document that will detail the process for restoring our IT responses following some kind of disruptive event. It will be comprehensive in scope, and it needs to be updated regularly. This is going to say who is responsible for what actions. And most of these will have a common set of features. They will cover specific topics, and they do require testing for verification. So some of our features we may see, for example, the typical outline of a disaster recovery plan. We'll see the purpose and the scope of it, who's on the recovery team, how we can prepare for disaster, what emergency procedures must take place, and how do we restore our business, our restoration procedures. Okay, the order of restoration is a sequence in restoring systems. So we look to see what systems have priority and has to be restored before other systems. We also need to look at what happens if a disaster makes our current location unavailable. Do we have an alternate processing site? We need to identify one of those. We also have a fallback. That's a process of resynchronizing data back to the primary location. You need to test your disaster recovery plan. You can use disaster exercises, which of these are designed to test the effectiveness of the disaster recovery plan. What we can do in this, they test the efficiency of interdepartmental planning and coordination in managing a disaster. They'll test the current disaster recovery plan procedures and determine the response strength and weaknesses. So we can use these to see where do we need to improve or what worked well. We can also use tabletop exercises. What these do is they allow us to simulate an emergency. The thing with the tabletop exercises is it's informal and it's a stress-free environment. You're not actually going through the emergency or the walkthrough. You're just talking it out, working through it. Once you go through a tabletop exercise, you also have an after action report that should be generated. Okay, so this is, once again, you're looking at what went well, what was the strengths, what was the weaknesses that you need to improve on. Some features of the disaster recovery plan include the participants, so that's the individuals on a decision-making level. The focus, which is the training and familiarizing roles, procedures, and responsibilities. We see here the setting, this is informal. The format for a tabletop is discussion guided by a facilitator. Purpose of this is identify and solve problems as a group. A commitment to a tabletop exercise is only a moderate amount of time, cost, and resources. Advantage of this, you can the advantages of a disaster recovery plan tabletop exercises is people can become familiar with their responsibilities in emergency procedures and other members of the team. The disadvantages is it does lack realism. Okay, this does not provide a true test. People will react different under pressure than they can when they have an informal discussion. When we talk about fault tolerance, we're looking at the system's ability to deal with malfunctions. The solution to fault tolerance is to build in redundancy, which is the use of duplicate equipment that's used to improve the availability of a system. Now, the goal of this is to reduce this variable that we know as the mean time to recovery, which is the average amount of time it takes for a device to recover from a failure. That's not a terminal failure. So when we're looking at redundancy planning, it's how can we build backups into our system? And this is going to apply to servers, storage, network, power, sites, and data. Servers are going to play a key role in network infrastructure, and when we do have a failure of these, they can have a significant business impact. A couple ways we can get around this is clustering, which is where we combine 2 or more devices to appear as a single unit. We can also do this with servers and have a server cluster, where you have multiple servers that appear as a single server, and they're connected through public and private cluster connections. 2 types of server clusters are asymmetric and symmetric. When we have an asymmetric server cluster, okay, the standby server performs no function except to be ready if it's needed. And this is going to be used for databases, messaging systems, file and print services. In a symmetric server cluster, all servers do useful work. So if one server fails, the remaining servers take over the failed server's work. And this is more cost efficient than asymmetric clusters. And this is what is being used for the web, media, and VPN services. Storage is moving in a trend to use solid-state drives. These are some drives that are more resilient to failure, and they are considered more reliable than the traditional hard drives. The hard drives, though, they're often the first component to fail. So a lot of organizations will keep a spare hard drive on hand. It's something easy to replace. We look at this when we say the mean time between failures is a measure of the average time until a component fails and must be replaced. An organization can use this to determine the number of spare hard drives that they should keep on hand. Also with storage, we can use the redundant array of independent devices, or RAID. What this does, it uses multiple hard disk drives to increase the reliability and performance. This is something that can be implemented through software or hardware, and there are several levels of RAID that exist. As we see an example here, we have RAID 0, and the minimum number of drops needed is 2. RAID 1 is 2 as well. When we get to RAID 5, we need 3, and RAID 0 plus 1 needs 4 drives. Now RAID 0, it uses a strip drive array, so the data is broken down into blocks, and each block is written to a separate drive. RAID 1 data is written to twice, 2 separate drives, so it's making a copy as it's written. RAID 5 is each data block is written on a data disk, and parity for some blocks in the same rank is generated and recorded on a separate disk. The RAID 0 plus 1 is a mirrored array with segments that are RAID 0 arrays. Now we see the advantages of these and the typical applications and the disadvantages. RAID 0, the advantage is simple design, easy to implement. Disadvantages is no fault tolerant, not fault tolerant. RAID 1, it's the simplest RAID to implement, but it can slow down systems if RAID controlling software is used instead of hardware. RAID 5 is the most versatile RAID, but it can be difficult to rebuild if a disk does fail. RAID 0 plus 1 does have a high input-output rates, but it is expensive. We can also set up redundant networks. These may be necessary due to critical nature of connectivity. What they do is they wait in the background during normal operations. They use a replication scheme to keep live network information current, and they will launch automatically in the event of a disaster. This hardware components for these are duplicated. In some organizations, they will actually sign a contract with a second internet service provider as a backup. You can also have software-defined networks. These controllers can increase network reliability, and they may lessen the need for redundant equipment. Power is going to be essential when planning for redundancy. We may use an uninterruptible power supply, UPS. Thus, it maintains power to equipment in the event of interruption in primary electrical power source. For example, if your electric goes out, your power goes out, the UPS kicks in and will keep your devices running. An offline UPS is the least expensive, simplest solution. This is something that's charged by the main power supply, and when the primary power is interrupted, it's going to start supplying power very quickly, and will switch back to standby mode when the primary power is restored. An online UPS is always running off its battery while the main power runs their battery charger. It's not affected by dips or sags in voltage, and can serve also as a surge protector. UPS systems can also communicate with network operating system to ensure that the orderly shutdown occurs. This can only give you supply power for a limited time as well, though. You can also use a backup generator, which is going to be powered by diesel, gas, propane to give you power. The 3 different recovery sites we're going to talk about is the hot, cold, and warm sites. Recovery sites are backup sites that you may need in case something happens to the building, some kind of major disasters to the building, such as flood, hurricane, tornado, and so forth, fire. The 3 we're going to talk about: hot. This is generally going to be run by a commercial disaster recovery service. What this does is duplicates the production site. It has all of the needed equipment, and the data backups can be moved quickly to the hot site. This is the one that's going to get you up and running the fastest. Cold site is going to provide office space. The customer must provide and install all equipment needed to continue operations. There's no backup immediately available. It is less expensive than a hot site, but it's going to take the longest to resume the full operation. Warm site's going to have the equipment installed, but it's not going to have any internet, telecommunications facilities, not the current data backups. It is, once again, less expensive than a hot site. It's going to be more expensive than a cold site. With this, you may have some time to install backups, turn on connections. It can be half a day more, depending on the organization, how fast they can get it running, and what they actually need. So when we look at these three sites, the hot site is going to be the most expensive, and it's going to give you the quickest turnaround. The warm site is going to be the second most expensive and the second quickest turnaround, and the cold site will be the least expensive, but it will take the longest time to get back up and running. Now, one trend we're seeing is the use of cloud computing, where the backup applications and data are stored to the cloud, and if a disaster occurs, then the data and the software can be restored in a hot, cold, and warm sites. All right, data backup is copying information to different medium and storing them in an off-site location. This is something that you need to do so it can be used in the event of a disaster. When we back up our data, it involves data backup calculations using different types of data backup and off-site backups. Two elements that are used in the calculation of when backups should be performed include the recovery point objective. That's the maximum length of time an organization can tolerate between backups. And the recovery time objective. That's the length of the time it will take to recover backup data. We also have a more comprehensive backup technology. It's known as continuous data protection. What this does is it performs continuous backups that can be restored immediately. It also maintains a historical record of all changes made to the data and creates a snapshot of the data. So it's like a reference marker. 3-2-1 backup plan. This says that there should always be 3 different copies of backups on at least 2 different types of storage media, and one of the backups should be stored at a different location. That's your off-site backup. Now, most of the off-site backups are using an online cloud repository. That's where most organizations are storing their off-sites. That's something that can be used to continuously back up the data. And you have several different internet services that are going to provide similar features to these, including the automatic continuous backup, universal access, delayed deletion, and online or media-based restore. There are some legal implications of off-site backups. The primary issue is going to involve data when it's subject to the laws of the country in which the storage facility resides. So when you have your data, it's in digital format, and if you're storing it into another country, the laws of that country are going to apply where that data is being stored. So you want to make sure that the organization identifies cloud service providers whose data center locations ensure that it fully complies with all applicable data sovereignty laws. We also have environmental controls that we need to look at. These are the methods to prevent disruption through environmental controls that include fire suppression, electromagnetic disruption protections, and also the proper configurations of our HVAC systems. Fire suppressions, these include the attempts to reduce the impact of a fire. We have a couple of requirements for a fire to occur. It has to be a type of fuel or combustible material. You have to have enough oxygen to sustain combustion, enough heat to raise material to its ignition temperature, and you have to have a chemical reaction, which is the fire itself. So, for example, if you have a server closet or room that contains computer equipment, you want a stationary fire suppression system. That would be recommended. Electromagnetic disruption protection. Uh, we have a couple of these we're going to talk about. The electromagnetic interference. This is called by short burst of energy by the source called an electromagnetic pulse in EMP. Electromagnetic compatibility, the EMC. This is reducing or eliminating unintentional generation, spread, and reception of electromagnetic energy. And the goal of this is the correct operation of different types of equipment that function in the same electromagnetic environment. We also have a cage. It's a metal enclosure that prevents entry or escape of electromagnetic fields. That's something that's also used in testing in electronic labs. All right, when we talk about our HVAC, data centers are going to have special cooling requirements. Those equipment is going to get very hot, so you may need more cooling. Since we have a large number of systems, it's going to generate a lot of heat in a confined area. So our heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems, or HVAC, this is going to maintain the temperature and relative humidity at the required levels. By controlling the environmental factors, we can also reduce electrostatic discharge. We can set up a hot aisle, cold aisle layout, and that's used to reduce heat by managing airflow. In this case, the servers will be lined up in alternating rows with the cold air intake facing one direction and the hot air exhaust facing the other direction. We also need an incident response. So when we have an unauthorized incident occurs, the incident response, it triggers an immediate response that is required. And an incident response is using forensics and following the proper incident response procedures. Forensic science. This is applying science to legal questions. So we analyze the evidence and how this can be applied to technology. And computer forensics is using that technology to search for computer evidence of a crime. This is important. The importance of computer forensics. This is risen due to the following: the amount of digital evidence, the increased scrutiny by legal professions, and the higher level of computer skills by criminals. Our incident response plan, that's a set of written instructions for reacting to a security incident. The process of this are 6 action steps that we need to take when an incident occurs. We need preparation, the identification, the containment, eradication, recovery. And then what do we learn? The lessons learned from this. At a very minimum, your IRP, your incident response plan, should contain a documented incident definitions, cyber incident response teams, reported requirements and escalation, and then exercises. When we're looking at forensics, we have 5 basic procedure steps that we need to take. We need to secure the crime scene, preserve the evidence, establish a chain of custody, examine the evidence, and then enable recovery. So to secure a crime scene, this is something that needs to be taken immediately. Individuals in the immediate vicinity should perform damage control. They report the incident to the security of the police. If the situation allows, confronting suspects. Neutralize a suspected perpetrator from harming others. If allowed, if the situation allows, secure physical security features, quarantine electronic equipment, and then contact the cyber incident response team. So when the response team arrives, their first job is to secure the crime scene. So in here, they need to make sure that the physical surroundings are documented, photographs are taken if anything is touched, before anything is touched. Computer cables are labeled. The team takes custody of the entire computer. They will interview witnesses. And the length of time passed since the initial incident should be noted as well. So when we talk about preserving the evidence, this is ensuring that the important proof is not destroyed. This is something that's sometimes hard to do with digital evidence because it is very fragile and it can be easily altered or destroyed. So one of the first steps for a legal hold to be issued is a notification sent from the legal team to the employees instructing them not to delete electronically stored or paper documents relative to the incident. Now, the cyber incident response team will need to capture the volatile data. This is the contents of the RAM, the current network connections, the login sessions, or any open files. With this, you must follow the order of volatility to preserve the most fragile data first. So we look at this, the register, the cache, peripheral memory. That's something we should be retrieved first. Then the RAM, the network state, and any running processes. There are tools that you can use to allow capturing the system images. You can take a snapshot of the current state of the computer. It contains all the current settings and data. You can also capture the current image on the screen by taking a screenshot. A couple other things you can do is mirror imaging backup of the hard drive. And this is also called a bitstream backup. This does meet evidence standards. But to guarantee accuracy, the mirroring imaging backup programs rely upon hashing algorithms as part of this validation process. You also want to establish a chain of custody. That's where you document that the evidence was maintained under strict control at all times. And this is to ensure that no unauthorized person was given the opportunity to corrupt the evidence. After this, you start examining for evidence. So after you create the mirror image of the system, the original system is secured, and the mirror image is what's going to be used to look for real evidence. And these include searches through Word documents, email files, spreadsheets, cache, cookies of the web browser. You can also find hidden clues by examining the RAM slack, drive slack, or metadata. That's the data about the data. We then move into the enable recovery phase. We look at the strategic intelligence. That's a collection of processing, analyzing, and dissemination of intelligence by forming policy changes. Strategic counterintelligence, that's going to involve gathering information about the attacker's intelligence collection capabilities. So how we find out what they use to gain the information for the attack. Active logging, while also maintaining active logs regarding the reconnaissance activities conducted by the attacker. So, Chapter 14 covered business continuity. That is, an organization's ability to maintain its operations after a disruptive event. When we're talking about IT contingency planning, we have an outline of procedures that are to be followed in the event of a major IT incident is developed. A disaster recovery is going to focus on restoring the information technology functions. Disaster recovery plan will detail that restoration process. We can use multiple redundancies through server clusters, RAIDs, network components, data backup. Use recovery point objective and recovery time objectives. That helps an organization determine the backup frequency. We have different ways we can help with disasters such as fire suppression system. May include water, dry chemical, clean agent systems. We need a defense for shielding electromagnetic fields. We make sure that our HVAC systems are maintained. Forensic science, it's an application of science to questions that are interest of the legal professions. And an incident response plan. It's a set of written instructions for reacting to a security incident.